All right. G'day, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to this first pilot chat that we're giving a go between four woke blokes from around the world. I'll introduce you all very shortly, but if you're watching this or if you're listening, thank you for tuning in, and yeah, really appreciate it. And this, as I said, this is the pilot effort. And I'll give you a bit of a backstory throughout the chat, and we'll see how we go. But I'm based in Australia. My name's Mark Morris, and in Australia, it's commonplace and respectful to open meetings with an acknowledgement of country to honour our traditional landowners and First Nations people. I reside on Barringam land, which is the traditional land of the Waka Waka people, the Gobble, and the Jarrawa peoples. And out of interest, Henry, I know you're on the other side of Australia, in Perth. What are the traditional landowners over there?
It's the Wajak people from the Noongar Nation. So
Oh,
we're
lovely.
over here in Boraloo, WA. So those are the traditional owners of our land.
Oh, lovely. All right. Well, no, lovely. And acknowledgement to wherever you're listening from around the world, because we've got some brothers in arms from the UK with us today. Sam Plant and Jeremy Stockdale. Really grateful to have you both, superstars of the movement, as we say, is trying to make the world a better place. Love both of your work. And out of interest, do you do an acknowledgement of country in the UK? To celebrate your traditional owners of the land?
We we don't we don't, Mark. No, we're not as perhaps switched on to that as you are in Australia.
No, that's
Nice
okay. I
to
was just
know. I haven't
interested.
seen that before. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just interested because I mean, we obviously have our Indigenous peoples in Australia have been in Australia for about 65,000 years, and I know that there have been people in Britain for around 50,000-ish years, and the British Empire has only been around for about 500 years, I believe. So it's like, a big gap of people there that were on in your country, in your part of the world. And yeah, anyway, different customs, see, we're learning, we're teaching people already. So look, so what are we doing here today? Four woke blokes. Rage Against the Patriarchy was the call sign that we decided on to get a bit of clickbait to get you listening today, and we'll get to that later. But I just wanted to pay homage to the young woman who really brought this together. A few of us were reached out to last year by a woman by the name of Daniela Andrade, and she's a very impressive woman based in the States. And she reached out to us, and it was around the time post Giselle Pellico that I'm sure you gents, can remember, and hopefully people listening will remember. The whole world should really remember, but anyway. And it was around that time that there was a call for, and still a growing call for now, men to be leading conversations about stopping and preventing violence against women, because as we know, a lot of the time, the people leading and advocating for the prevention of violence against women are women. But as four woke blokes, as I say, we want to try and do our bit too, and help out, because we don't really want violence against anyone, especially women and children. So credit to her, and I haven't discussed this with Jeremy, Sam, and Henry, but if we make millions of dollars out of this series, obviously we'll we'll make sure that we don't spare Daniela from her due
Hang
credits.
on there, Mark. Listen, I'm out. If that's the
Gotta look at
And-
the
and
paperwork.
I totally.
Just to preface as well with anyone who's watching or listening, this is the first time that Jeremy, Sam, Henry, and I have come together. I've got some notes for what I want to try and talk about today, but we're relatively unscripted, and that's kind of how we wanted to present it to you today. We wanted to present it to you as a conversation between four regular guys, and what we can try to all do, to get on board and help each other. So I've spoken enough. I'm facilitating, but I'm the least interesting person of the four of us. So I really want to get to everyone else's dulcet tones. So one of the call signs, as I mentioned earlier, was that for woke blokes. And the term woke has been getting a lot of you know airplay lately, especially around American and Australian politics. But what woke really means, in terms of the definition, is that you care about social justice, you care about fairness, you care about equity, you care about people. So I find it really interesting that, woke is sometimes used as a bit of a slur, when really it's a commendation. If you're woke, if you're aware of what's going on around you, if you're aware of the injustices and people being treated unfairly around you, that's good. And I wasn't always, and I can't speak for the other three gents, but we'll get to them in a sec. But that's what I want to do now. I want to go around the room. I want you to get to know these fine gentlemen. And if I can ask you, and I'm just going to go around the screen in no specific order, gents. Sorry to put you on the spot, but tell the listeners a little bit about yourself. Not everything, because we want to maybe have some other episodes after this, so you've got to tease it a bit. But tell people about yourself, the lens that you see the world through, and if you consider yourself woke, how did you wake up? When did you wake up? So Sam, you're top of screen for me, so you're up first.
All right, thanks, Mark. Yeah, and listen, thanks for the invitation to join the chat. It's really good to be here. Yeah, I mean, I'm a sort of middle-aged English guy. Middle-aged, maybe a bit optimistic actually, but middle-ish age. I mean, I spent, I'm a lawyer by background. I've spent most of my sort of professional life in and around boardrooms in big businesses. Been married together with my wife for about 30 years. I've got 2 girls, lots of friends who are women, as well as lots of friends who are men. But until very recently, and I'm really going back, I don't know, 18 months or so. So, a very small proportion of my life. Until recently, I just had a sort of, looking back on it, a really curious lack, a striking lack of sort of curiosity about the experience of people who didn't sort of look like me, and no real sense of the little invisible privileges that a kind of white, straight guy like me, who sits right at the kind of center of, when you think of all those sort of different characteristics, I sit right in the center, relatively affluent, all these things going for me that I was completely oblivious to. And had, to borrow a phrase that I know Jeremy uses, I'd always kind of considered myself a bit of a good guy. I felt I was kind of supportive of other people, wouldn't do anything that was sort of disrespectful. But only very recently really started to be aware of just how different some of my colleagues' experience was, people that I spent, a huge amount of time with. And for me, the sort of wake up moment, nothing particularly dramatic, just on the back of another kind of celebrity Me Too moment, I just started asking a few of my colleagues, female colleagues, about their experiences initially in the world of work, and then also in their wider lives. And I was gobsmacked. I mean, not by the individual stories so much, although there were some of them that were pretty awful, but just by the kind of just the everyday grind of that, and just how many different challenges they had to deal with that I didn't even have to think about. I just took for granted. And I think it was those conversations that just kind of switched me on, or to use that word, kind of woke me up. And once you see that stuff, you can't really sort of unsee it, and then you either do something about it or you don't. And I didn't really feel it was much of a choice.
Well, good on you, mate. No, thanks for being vulnerable and open there, Sam. And I think I can definitely attest to parts of that myself. And I think someone, a friend of mine here in Australia, you know, because I felt bad at one point myself, and spoke to him about it, and I said, I just didn't know, I didn't realize, you know. And he talks a lot about privilege, and he said, no, don't feel bad because you didn't realize. He said, we can't see past our own privilege. He said, but now that you can see it, now it's your responsibility to do something about it, and now you can feel bad if you don't. So you know, once you see it, you can't unsee it. But yeah, that's, as you said, Sam, you know, we're all born into a certain layer of privilege, some more than others, obviously. Yeah, it's where we go from there. Anyway, Jeremy, want to hear from you. On Wednesdays, we smash the patriarchy, wearing a shirt in honor of that famous slogan. Love it. I believe that, well, I won't steal your thunder. I know where it started, but I love where it started. But anyway, tell us about yourself.
So it's interesting listening to Sam, because, you know, Sam and I met probably, it was about 18 months ago. You started writing these most incredible posts, and we found there's some real similarities in our stories. I mean, for me, I also thought I was a good guy. In my first career, I worked for a bank, and in the last 15 years, I led large teams across the UK and Africa. That was the privilege I had, and I loved leadership. And I thought I was a good guy, you know, good gender balance in my team, sponsored, mentored women. And it was only when there's a young woman called Sarah Everard that was back in 2021. She was abducted, raped, and murdered by a serving police officer in the UK. It's a horrific thing to happen. But it was just the reaction from women that really struck me. It was almost unprecedented, because women said, we can never be safe. How can we possibly be safe in a scenario like that? And I spoke to quite a few women at the time, like Sam did, and one in particular, I said, I just feel really helpless. I don't know what to do. What can I do to be a better male ally? And she said, read 2 books. One was Everyday Sexism by Laura Bates, and the other one was Invisible Women by Caroline Criollo Perez. And I read those books, and they just blew my mind, because I didn't know how 51% of the global population experienced the world, and I was 51 at the time. And so after that, I read many more books, and I've spoken to hundreds of women, and I'm not an expert in the female experience, never will be, but I do sleep less stupid. And, you know, back to what you were saying, Sam, I love the Maya Angelou quote where she says, you know, or it was actually you, Mark, that references, you know, you do the best you can until you know better, but when you know better, you do better. And that's all I'm trying to do. So after I started to educate myself, it took me a while before I started to really do stuff with it. I felt I needed to kind of know things and to contribute. And I started writing posts on LinkedIn about 2 years ago, because my daughter's got this very same T-shirt, and we often spoke about it. And I persuaded her to let me write a post about it. I took a picture of her, and then I did a little interview about why do you smash the patriarchy on Wednesdays. And it was quite well received. So the following week, I wrote one about a bit more generically, well, how does the patriarchy impact women, from what I've learned? Then a week after, I wrote about how it impacts men, which I'm sure is something we'll talk a bit about later today. And I just carried on writing them ever since. So it's 2 years now. Every single Wednesday, I write one of these posts, and that's how you and I met, Mark, and I think it's how we connected, actually, Sam, as well. And the beauty of them is that I learn stuff every single week from writing them. And I like to think what it also does is bring a community of people together, and not just people who agree with each other. Because I've actually met some good friends on there. People who initially came on and said, "Oh, smashing the patriarchy is a load of old bollocks. You know, there's no patriarchy. It's all." In fact, there's an Aussie guy who I've become really good friends with who did exactly that, and we ended up kind of having a little bit of a chit chat. It went to DM, and it's helped me to understand why he views the world through the lens that he does, which has been really insightful for me. So yeah, still loads to learn. But I think what you're doing here, Mark, in bringing people together to talk about these things and share their experiences and actually try to make a difference is really powerful. So thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks, Jeremy. I love that story. And I'm really glad you mentioned that story about your daughter as well, because I love that origin of where it came from. So yeah, well done. Well, look, and Henry, love to hear about yourself and the lens that you see the world through.
Yeah, name is Henry Cooper, here in WA, Perth. And I'm originally from New York City. And I migrated over here about 12 years ago. And I would say when I woke up, that's an interesting one because I was just reflecting on that and I was like, I'm trying to remember like when that was because my family has always been a certain kind of way. Like my father was absolutely phenomenal. And his brothers were the same way. And they were raised by a strong Black woman. Their father was passed away when he was around 7 years old. So my grandmother was raising 9 kids on her own and traveled and migrated from South Carolina all the way to New York with 9 kids, and not one of them growing up in New York City at that time, not one of them ever went to jail or got on drugs or anything like that. So that kind of strength and the lessons that we were taught. I remember when I was younger, there's several people in my family that are gay. And I remember, and it wasn't anything that I saw that was foreign for me. It was just people were a part of my family. And I remember the only time that I ever felt that it was something that was bad, perceived to be bad, was when I went to school. So I remember coming back from school and telling my father, like, hey, people are saying that, our uncles and, our cousins are bad. Like they're not good people because they're gay. Um, and I remember my father saying, he goes, all you have to do, he goes, all you have to do is remember, all you got to do is listen to me and God. He goes, just because person is a certain way and lives a certain kind of life doesn't mean that they're exempt from love, right? So you treat people how you want to be treated. You treat people with empathy and you treat people with kindness. That's what my father taught me. So what I do for a living has always it's always been aligned with me, and it's always. And my father told me, "You are who you protect." So it's making sure that the people that are in your care and the people that are around you are protected. And that protection is it's not about being physical, it's about being mentally safe. It's about being emotionally safe. And those are the tools that my father gave me. So like when I woke up, I feel like I've been awake and I've been trying to learn even more with my female friends and asking them questions because I don't know everything. I don't have that experience. I don't know the nuances around that. And that's how I try to learn a lot better.
That's awesome. Love that. Thanks, Henry. Thanks for sharing. I know you've done a lot of work in schools in your past as well, and working with kids and so forth. So yeah, no, I think that perspective that you have and that comes through your family is amazing. And imagine if we all just, were kind to each other and without
Yes.
expecting other people to be like ourselves, wouldn't the world be a better place? So no, look, thanks for that, gents. And look, I'll just be quick because I've spoken most, but for fairness, when did I wake up? I don't know, constantly waking up more and more every day the more I read, like Jeremy. I think the
Mm.
Invisible Women book was a big one for me, and reading that one. So if anyone listening to this hasn't read it, please do. Please follow these three gents on LinkedIn if you don't already. The weekly posts from all of you, actually, ironically, I've noticed you'll do the weekly posts, and I love it. They're all different, but I think they challenge our thinking, and I think that's the biggest thing. And I've started saying that to people recently: is I don't need you to think like me, but I need you to think. And I think we
Yeah.
all get stuck in these ways of like just believing things or going along with things. Oh, why do you do that? And it's like, oh, well, it's just because I've always done that. Or my dad voted this way, or my dad smacked us when we were kids, so I'm going to smack my kids, and the cycle
Mm.
continues. So, I think we just need to ask ourselves why. Like, why do we do that? Why do we do that? Why do men not, do the housework, et cetera, et cetera. We won't get too preachy, but no, look, when did I wake up? Look, I was raised in a single parent family, with my mum and four of us. And so I think it was interesting growing up in that environment, because, you know, on reflection, tasks weren't so much gendered, you know, because mum just did everything, you know. So I didn't really have a concept of like what was a man's job and what was a woman's job. So the danger there was obviously that I would potentially see everything as a woman's job because I saw mum doing everything. You know, mum was doing the cleaning, the cooking, looking after us, taking us to school, also doing the mowing and stuff like that outside, killing the spiders and all that jazz. So, you know, so growing up with that lens, I suppose I could have had one perspective, but it, I'm going to lead in accidentally now to the rage term because I know rage in itself got a bit of clickbait when I posted that one. But look, you know, it made me a little bit angry, you know, and I don't mind saying that because for a long time I was just pissed off at the world in a way. Um, because I felt like that wasn't fair. Like that wasn't fair on mum, that she had to do everything. You know, it wasn't fair that basically she lost herself basically because you know, she had to look after us. And as I think you're all dads, and many people listening might be parents too, you lose a bit of yourself, you know, but you gain a lot too when you become a
Yeah,
parent.
yeah.
And so, but when you're raising a family of four on your own, you know, you potentially lose a little bit more. So I grew up seeing that. And I just remember thinking, if I ever have kids, I'm going to be around. I'm not gonna do this. I'm not gonna let this happen. Like there's no way that this is fair, you know. And I don't want. I had to grow up without a dad, you know, and I don't want my kids to grow up without a dad if I had kids. And obviously now I do have kids, and I'm very. I think about that every day. I think about how they see me. I think about, you know, how much they see me, and I think about my legacy, you know. So I suppose, you know, I woke up in a way when I was a kid, you know. But as I said, you know, more and more every day. And yeah, so look, I used to be angry. You know, I'm not so angry anymore, bit of a pacifist now, you know, more of a lover, not a fighter these days. But, you know, so I thought I'd put that to the group as well in terms, you know, because I mentioned legacy there, and we've spoken a little bit about your background, but if I can, you know, put it out to the three of you as well, you know, what's your legacy? You know, what are you doing? You know, why the rage against the patriarchy? And you don't have to be angry like me, but like, you know, why is it an issue for you and what are you doing about it? You know, Sam?
Yeah, legacy's a big word, isn't it? And
Mm,
and listen, it's really interesting to hear your different stories as well, and
Mm.
how we've sort of come to some sort of shared shared sort of point from very different places, from people who were woke almost from birth through to someone like me who spent 50 odd years you know, asleep to some of that stuff. But I think for me, you know, I'm acutely aware of the fact, and you know, I know you guys have said similar things, of the fact that I don't have any expertise in this area. I mean, everything that I've learned about the whole area of gender equality, I've kind of learned predominantly from women. So the posting thing for me has been brilliant. I mean, I find it quite therapeutic to post, to
Mm.
be honest. I'm kind of largely
yeah.
doing it to maybe there's that kind of building rage, whereas you might have started angry, Mark, and become a little bit calmer. I think I was very calm and tranquil and unbothered for decades, and actually I do feel a sort of an anger really, and a wish to do something about it. But I think, you know, posting and learning from people's comments is just brilliant. I mean, it's been like a kind of sponge absorbing this stuff, and I'm very conscious of the fact that there are so many people like me. There is absolutely nothing special about me. I'm you know, a kind of normal guy who's had you know, a good career with a lot of good fortune, but you know, a normal sort of business career. And if there's any sort of legacy or thing that I want to achieve, it is just to make people like me just just think a little bit more about why they are where they are. Just reflect on that a bit. Think. I love your comment, Mark, that I think the world's a dangerous place if we all feel the same way. Whatever that view is, and the whole stuff going on about diversity in the US, there's a few more of these podcasts, I think, Mark, that we could spend talking about that. But that sort of diversity of thought and just challenging ourselves and thinking a bit more and reflecting on other people's experience and just opening our ears, whatever we then do with that knowledge, I think that's really powerful, really important. So I just try through those posts and through things like this, which is fantastic, just to reach people who are like me, and hope. And it is difficult because we all live in our little algorithmic bubbles, don't we? And the world feels increasingly tribal. But just to kind of get people out of those bubbles a little bit, get them out of their tribe, and just try and have some conversations with people from other bubbles, from other filter bubbles. So that's tough. And I think the jury is very much out for me on whether I'm actually puncturing that bubble, and whether you can, through things like LinkedIn posts, whether you can really influence and even reach people whose immediate reaction to the word patriarchy might have been like mine 18 months ago, which was to sort of think, bloody hell, this is all a bit extreme. I don't get this stuff. But that's the ambition, Mark.
I love that. I love it. And I'm not going to go around robin, gents, so I'll mix it up a bit. But following on from what you said, Sam, about your legacy, and I think I can attest to some of that myself. And the way I think about it, though, it's maybe the same. We're just putting in different words, but like I want people to know what I didn't know, but I want them to know it sooner. And because I was going along in a lot of ways, and even though I had the childhood I had, but there's still a lot of other privilege that I have as an English speaking, white straight guy, and for some reason people listen to me, and but having a sporting background, I also like unfair advantage never sat well with me. Like if I like to win, I'm competitive, but I don't want to win unfairly. I don't want to get the job because I'm a guy. I don't want people to listen to me more because I'm white. Like that doesn't feel right to me. And so I've just started talking to people like yourself, Sam, in terms of, the things that I learn. I'll just talk to other people in my network and say, hey, did you know this? Because I just learned this, and this doesn't seem very fair, and they go, oh no, I didn't realize. I'll go, okay, well, tell someone else, and then someone else will know, and then the more people that know, knowledge is power, I suppose. So yeah, and so Jeremy, I'd love to hear a bit about what you do as well, because I know you actually go out to groups and work with groups, and I suppose I don't want to tell you that that's your legacy, but from what I see, you're making a difference in terms of working with people and challenging their thinking. Yeah, what do you want to talk about that in terms of what you do?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's such a great question. What's your legacy? It's something I often used to think about. One of the reasons I left my corporate career is because I didn't want my legacy to be another 10 years of just working in a corporate. I no longer thought I could make much of a difference there. But up until that point, I felt I was making a difference to the lives of the people I led. I found my purpose as a leader, and that's what kind of really made me want to show up every day. I just thought leadership was a real privilege, and I loved all the responsibility that went with it. So when I left and I formed my company Why Lead, was because I wanted to help other leaders find their why, lead with purpose, and find out what is it, why do they show up as a leader, and why should people follow them? So my legacy was actually to make leadership something which is a force for good in organizations, in society, in governments. I mean, fuck. So that was the kind of the idea behind it. And of course now I'm through the work I do around gender, It's helped me to understand things much better. And it's just generally made me more curious about the world and how it works in a way that I wasn't before. For me, acquiring knowledge was always a bit of a hurdle I had to overcome to get somewhere, whether it's at school or university, and then banking exams, even my MBA. It's just kind of you overcome that hurdle and you kind of stop learning. Whereas now, I just think every single day, I just want to, I want to find out what I'm wrong about, so tomorrow I'll be less wrong. And it's a really liberating place to be, because you suddenly find the world is much more expansive, which then means in terms of legacy, maybe I can have a bigger impact on the world. And I can only do that by working with other people like you and the people who comment on my posts, and the organizations I work with. So a lot of the work I do with organizations and individual leaders is to help them to find their purpose as a leader, and get them to lead with more compassion and more curiosity and courage, actually, and just broadly humanity, because that's what I think is so lacking. I have a very strong sense of fairness. My core value is fairness, and I only realized that when I was starting to run my own company and thinking about what really mattered to me. But I look back now, and as a small boy, I'd have tantrums if I felt things weren't fair. And even when I was in the corporate world, I would have similar kind of tantrums if I felt there was unfairness either for me and my team. It's a visceral reaction it has. But very often I felt helpless, and that's why I had tantrums. Whereas now I feel I'm not helpless. If I see that unfairness, then maybe I can do something about it. I've got a lot of advantages. As you said, Sam, I'm now much more aware of those. Like you said, Mark, I didn't realize how just my physiology and background, the advantages that gives me in terms of people just listening to me compared to others. And when I first discovered that, I was quite embarrassed about it. But now I think, okay, so that's privilege. So that privilege comes with responsibility. So I need to use that wisely, and then use it to also amplify the voices of others that perhaps don't get the same airtime because they're not 6 foot, white, and male and middle aged. So yeah, I think for me the legacy is very. I really feel passionate about the power of leadership, and that most leadership isn't done very well because people aren't taught how to lead. They don't lead from, they lead from here, but not from their heart and not from their guts. And that's what I want leaders to be responsible for. And leadership isn't about having a title either. You can show up as a leader in any kind of walk of life. Um, so yeah, that's my legacy. But I also feel, just more broadly, looking at what's going on in the world at the moment, we need to kind of fight back against just the. It's not even assault. It's an assault on democracy, but it's an assault on humanity. Some of the things that I'm seeing in different parts of the world, but of course it's not happening in the UK or in Australia either, in different pockets. But it's an assault on humanity, and humanity needs to fight back, just with the basic things that we as humans bring, like compassion. That's what we need more of, not less of. So. And the final thing I just want to say, Mark, because I'm getting obviously quite passionate about it. I think rage is good, and anger's good. We're often told to suppress those things. No, we need to be really fucking angry about what's happening at the moment, and rage against it collectively, and to create a different narrative for how the world's going to turn out. You might have to edit out the swearing later.
No, fuck that. No, look, this is for adult. This is for adults. So yeah, no, look, I love that, Jeremy. And look, I think I feel similarly. I think rage is okay if it's used in the right way, and because I genuinely think some of the stuff that's happening in the world right now, if you're not angry about it, I don't know what you're looking at, because you should be. You know what I mean? Like, you really should be. And yeah, look, but I don't want to jump in here because you don't know how perfect that segue was to Henry, because you were talking about leadership. And so I'm just going to say, Henry, can you just say some things? And because I know what Henry does. And yeah, just talk about yourself for a bit, Henry.
Like what I do for a living, I work with CEOs and heads of state here in WA around accelerating gender equity within their organizations. And it's really around, just the education behind it. What I find is that a lot of leaders are just not educated around what it actually means. because of how social media is and how the world is shaped right now, is that all these terms have been thrown around and they've been condensed into meaning one thing for people. When in actuality, it's supposed to be broken down and it's different terms that are used, and it's the understanding behind those terms. But everything that people are saying today, I'm like, this is how I saw the world and how everything was for me since birth. Like I was born in this and had to navigate this and been screaming from the top of my lungs that this isn't fair and that this isn't right. So when they say, oh, they're too woke, I'm like, you just know that people are just figuring it out now. Now we have now those that are in the middle have an advantage now because now we have the numbers, right? So it's a joy to see that. But I think what it comes down to is it's how you treat people. That's what I always say is the real crux of leadership. It's hard to see the world. It's hard to see the bigger picture when you can't see what's right in front of you. And it starts with you, right? So if you can't see who you are, if you don't know who you are, it's going to be very, very difficult for you to see the bigger picture and to be empathetic towards somebody else, to show that kind of kindness, to try to put yourself in other shoes. It's going to be very difficult. So when it comes down to leadership, I always say like it has to start inside of us. And it has to start with curiosity. It has to start with understanding. It's like sometimes it's like you just need to be quiet and just listen. That's it.
Yeah. No, I love
But
that.
legacy,
Thanks,
but
Henry.
legacy wise, I think my legacy, like I thought about this for a very long time, and I'm moving right now in my legacy mode. I always said I want to leave the world a lot better than when I found it. Me being the age that I am, in my family, I'm an elder now. So it is my responsibility and it's my duty to give that information to this next generation and to build platforms for them to take advantage of what we have done. So I always feel it's my duty to move in this space and do what I do.
Love that. Love that.
Awesome.
Thanks, Henry. And look, and for my 10 cents as well, and if you're listening to this and if you're still listening, I would encourage everyone to be active, not passive in your everyday. Not only learn, but talk to people about what you learn. You have to be an activist, but you can speak up for the things that you see and when things aren't fair, and I don't know if any of you gents follow Jackson Katz. He's from the US, but he's very one of the kind of founders of the bystander movement, if you like. And he put a quote out a while ago, and it stuck with me that if you're not actively part of the solution, then you're passively part of the problem. And so I think that's a choice that everyone, needs to make. And we've all got different ways that we can cast a shadow. The four of us have all held corporate roles, and I'd like to think we're all pretty regular kind of guys. And I think that's what I talk to people about when I talk to them. It's like, well, I'm nobody. I'm absolutely nobody. I'm not a CEO. I'm not a political leader. I'm not an influencer. Definitely not. Not a celebrity. But I'm a regular guy doing things that regular people can do. They just don't. And so I think if everyone kind of just did more, and like listening to what you were saying, Jeremy, I've held leadership roles myself over the years, and I think these things that happen, we're talking about, and I'm looping back to try and give some credit to the topic that Daniela wanted to bring us together on is like violence against women, and these things happen around us every day,
Yeah.
but you just don't see them, and so I was managing a team, and I'd like to think that as a leader, I created a safe space for everyone in my teams, and they felt safe with me psychologically and physically. And one day there was a young woman who was in my team, and we were working back late. Not just the two of us. There were other people in the office, but it was most of the people had gone home. And she said, "Oh, Mark, do you mind walking to the lift with me and just riding the lift down with me. I was like, oh yeah, sure, yeah, no problem. Like, and on the way down, I just said, oh, is everything okay? Like, is there a reason why? And she said, oh, sometimes, such and such, naming a particular person, gets in the lift, and I feel really uncomfortable when the doors close and it's just the two of us. And she was in her 20s, and I suppose, 5 foot-ish, and this other gentleman in the office was in his 40s and 6 foot something, so without painting the full picture, you can connect some of the dots. And I was just like, how fucked up is this, that my staff can't even feel safe getting in a lift and going home because of how other people act, and in this case, a 40-year-old white man, so this is, all of these things just keep popping up, and I think sometimes we just don't pay attention to them. And this is, it came through Carolyn's book, obviously. Jeremy, you've read it, and women change the way they walk, like they, and as a man, it's like, well, if I'm going out for a run at night, I don't even think about it. Like, I'm like, oh, which way am I going to go? And I'm thinking about the hills and, the surface of the path, or, like, oh, I don't really feel like going up a big hill, so I'm going to go this way. But statistically speaking, many women are more thinking about, well, where's the best lighting? What's the most populated areas? Or I'm just not going to go at all because I don't feel safe. And it's just, and as a dad as well, like, I mean, not saying that you have to be a dad to care about these things, because I think that's a topical thing as well. But as a dad, like, I don't want my kids growing up in a world where they don't feel safe. Like, that's just, I don't, as you said, I don't know how people can't get angry about that. So, and then at the other end of the spectrum, when you hear about the Giselle Pellico type stuff, like, for me, and I've this is probably just the privilege that I've had in my life, I hear about that, so I'm like, that's fucked. Like, who does that? Like, how do people even grasp to do something like that? And yet obviously the world has seen how she's responded, and how she's kept her head up despite what she's been through, and rightly so, gotten so much respect. And I love her kind of quote that, shame needs to change sides, it's not the victims that need to be ashamed. But anyway, so I ranted a bit longer than I planned to there. Sorry about that. But so I want to put out to the three of you in the time that we've got left, because one of the topical issues, and I know we're all really passionate about the prevention of violence and aggression towards women. So what are your thoughts on that, Sam? What can we do, or what would you suggest to people to make things better?
Yeah. And I love your passion there, Mark. I thought that was fantastic. I mean, a couple of things occurred to me just listening to you talk. I mean, one of them is that issue around awareness, and I think, I mean, some of the early conversations I had with people just made me realize the sort of the enormous amount of brain power that people were having to use up to construct strategies to avoid being in a room with that bloke over there, the handsy guy. And things that, I mean, it's ridiculous really to think about it, but it kind of blew my mind really, because they were just things I was not aware of. I wasn't aware of the difficulties if I scheduled a meeting early in the morning in the winter, or later in the afternoon. That meant that female colleagues were going to have to get home. For me, that's not a big deal. Walk to my car, walk to the tube, whatever it was. I just never really thought about the additional challenges that would bring for some of my, half of my colleagues, if we just look at it through a sort of gender lens. So I think absolutely that awareness bit, and that leads into, and we're kind of edging into that kind of not all men issue, in that I think the reaction to things like Giselle Pellico and other, Sarah Everard, other kind of appalling incidents. And I'm conscious that I have done this, but the reaction sometimes is, well, I'm a good guy. I'm not a rapist. I'm not someone, come down that scale. I'm respectful, all of these sort of things. So that's somebody else, and that's somebody else's problem. And I think one of the things that sort of opened my eyes was this. You've probably seen it. I don't know what you call it, the kind of pyramid of shite, the
Violence,
pyramid of awfulness, where you've got at
yeah,
the top, the very worst sorts of violence that we're talking about. And then you work your way down until the
yeah.
bottom, you've got kind of off-color jokes, kind of banter,
Mm.
stuff which, if left sort of unchecked, and that frankly we probably all experience and we're all kind of part of every day, but
Mhm.
if left unchecked, just starts to move up that pyramid. And so for me, that kind of connected me to Sarah Everard or to Giselle
Mm.
Pellico, and made me realize that just because I wasn't perpetrating anything didn't mean I didn't have a responsibility or the ability to do something about it. Because I think with a lot of these things, we've talked a lot about awareness, and I love your comment, Henry, that if you're not aware of who you are, how you ever going to sort of lead. But I think one of the other challenges is just that once you become aware, how do you change some of this stuff? It's too big. How do you go about dismantling some of the very worst sorts of behavior? And for me, the answer was in part where you start where you are, and if you're at the bottom of that pyramid, you start influencing
Yeah.
those around you as you can. And that is actually quite challenging itself, isn't it? Sometimes it's a good mate. You're playing football with him. He makes a comment. The easy thing to do is just let it slide.
Mhm.
But actually, I think that is how you draw a line from your behaviour to the top of that pyramid, and that was a real
Yeah.
kind of wake up moment for me.
Mm.
I love that. Thanks, Sam. Yeah, no, and I'm not an academic, and I don't know if we want to take more of an academic, tone to this chat in future, gents, but I will throw a couple of references out there for you, because something you said kind of reminded me. So the not all men thing for starters. So,
Mm.
and when I started hearing that, I was like, yeah, this is not all men. I'm a good guy. Like I'm out here, fighting the patriarchy in my own way. But some research by some Australian groups, actually. So there was a group called the Jesuit Social Services, and they did some research called the Man Box Study. And the Man Box Study looked at attitudes by boys and men. And so what the first Man Box Study found was that boys and men who held more rigid views of what a man should do, be, look like, ideals of more, the older what we're fighting against, basically, was 17 times more likely to be violent to their partner than boys and men
Wow.
who had more progressive views of masculinity.
Mm.
The Man Box 2 study was really interesting, and I'd encourage everyone to have a look at the Man Box research. What it actually did was it looked at asked questions like, have you done X, Y, and Z, and acts of violence, basically. And there might not be physical violence, but they might be like uh you know controlling, or choking's another whole thing. I won't get into that, but so like, violent in some ways. And so what they found was that 45% of men had been violent in some way to their partner in the past 12 months. So I'm not saying that 45% of men are violent. This is just the research, and that's what research is. But what I am saying is, when we're talking about not all men, it's not 1 or 2% of men. It's a lot of men.
Mm.
And
Mm.
it's a lot of just acceptance, that we go, oh yeah, that's just part of being a man. It's just what men do. And and obviously you all know I'm very passionate about kids and schools, and it's the boys will be boys type attitude, and it's kind of like, if you walk past it, then I just wonder what we're growing in young boys, if we we let them have the boys will be boys for 15 years, and then look what happens anyway. So, but I segued too far there, but Jeremy, I want to hear from you. You know, what's your advice to people, or thoughts, or 10 cents? You know, what do you think we can do to kind of
Yeah.
help against this, tendency of violence that we're seeing everywhere?
I think really what Sam said, I completely agree with. Become aware of the reality. It has to start with that. Because I think I would have not. You would see the terrible stories. Obviously, the Giselle Pelicot one is an extreme one, and you'd see and you think, oh, isn't that terrible? That's a monster. There's a terrible man that's done that. And I think one of the biggest things we need to accept, and all the research shows it, these are not monsters. These are ordinary men. In the Giselle Pelicot case, there was a judge, there was a solicitor, there was a carpenter. These were ordinary men, and all men are and they're normal men until they actually do commit rape or other forms of sexual violence. So that's the first thing, is to dispel that mythology. Then when you become aware of things, and accept that is the reality. That's the reality of the situation we're facing. I would really like men to, rather than kind of feel defensive or to kind of feel, well, I don't do that, is to get angry, get really angry about it, because that is our daughters, our friends, our colleagues, our mothers, our wives. It's them that's experiencing this, and if anyone thinks it doesn't impact them, it will do, because one in three women globally have experienced sexual violence. Get fucking angry about that, and then channel that anger in some way. Whether it's because you start to kind of just explore this a bit more and use your voice on LinkedIn, or whether you start to kind of talk to other men about it, or you just start to call out behaviour you wouldn't have done before. Whatever you do, it's taking some action. And I honestly believe that the more men that start to do that, we will change this quite quickly, and it will become more of an anomaly rather than an endemic issue. It's one of the biggest crises that is affecting humanity, and but we tend to see it. Oh, this happened, and very often in the way it's reported, you see the reports that says things like, I don't know. I'm probably making up a case, but it resonated. I remember it from somewhere. Like, uh, man kills wife after she served his food cold. So she did something wrong, and that's the consequence. Or, loving father of three slaughters entire families. Like, what are we doing? What are we doing? So we have to start to kind of really become aware of these things, understand the true reality of what's going on, and then get angry and take some action collectively. I think that's what needs to happen. And I think that's something you said, Henry, that whole self-awareness thing is so important. I've always thought that in leadership, but just start to become aware of your own kind of reactions and your own emotions. Are you feeling quite apathetic about it? Are you feeling defensive? Because I think once you do, you can start to think about, well, is it about me, or is there a bigger picture here that I need to move towards? So we definitely need more men talking about this, because it's actually really quite rare. And I think Daniele's suggestion is a great one.
Yeah. Thanks, Jeremy. Well, I'm mindful of time. Henry, bring us home. What can we do? Lend us your dulcet tones. What can we do? What can people do? How can we fix it?
Tell us, Henry.
Yeah, I think it's just like what Jeremy said. It's get angry about it, but I think it's about men holding men and showing what accountability looks like. We have to hold them to a higher standard and let people know that we will not tolerate this. If we are going to say not all men, then we have to be the ones that stand up and say, this is not okay. We need to make laws around this. You are not going to be that way in our society. That is not acceptable. I think we have to be in places and in rooms and be bold enough to risk something, risk our being comfortable, risk our privilege. It's risking something that's greater than ourselves. When standing up for what this is, I always said that there's been a very big disconnect here in the world. I remember when I was growing up, I always had the counsel of people that were older than me. I always had people that were older than me around me. There has always been places that I could go to be around great men, whether it be coaches, whether it be mentors. There was always access to that kind of thing. I feel like this generation, nobody's looking out for them. Nobody's around to counsel. The boys are left by themselves now because everybody's either, there's no dad in the picture sometimes, or everybody's out partying, or everybody's out doing their own thing, or they're going to work and they're working way too much. They're left to their own devices. We need to start being mentors in spaces, representing what good men look like, because we need to give them another perspective, another vision of what that looks like, because all we have is the extremes, and they're trying to pick and choose which one they fit into.
That's such a brilliant point. In fact, that would be a brilliant topic for a future session. I totally agree with that, Henry. Where are the positive male role models?
Even in schools, if you look, it's so predominantly women. There's no men that are teachers. There's no men that they can model themselves after. I know I modeled myself after brilliant men in my life. Like my coaches, my teachers, some of my teachers that I had. These are the people that I looked up to. I feel like these kids don't have that. And the people that they're looking up to are on social media, and everything on there is fake.
Yeah. I love that, Henry. It's really interesting to say that. I could start another hour of conversation now, but I feel like for me, I contrast that experience that you just described, whereby you had some really fantastic male role models and that helped you to kind of set you on a path that you're on. For me, I think I've always I come from a sporting background, right? So imagine football, right? If you can, that's soccer, Henry, for you.
Yeah.
So football. Yeah,
I
right.
got the lingo now that I'm over here. Right?
The rest of the world calls it football, but anyway. No. So and I would generally play in defence, right? And so, but if I noticed that they needed help on the left, I'd shift to the left. And if I noticed they needed help on the right, or if there was a gap on the right that I wanted to exploit, I'd shift to the right. So, and I think if you think about that concept, I've always kind of applied that in my life and my career, and I've tried to address gaps. And I think if we're talking about masculinity, I've tried to be what I didn't see, because I didn't see positive male role models. They either weren't there at all, or the males that I saw were what I somehow identified as not what I wanted. And so I thought, well, that's not what I want. I don't want to be that. I don't want to treat girls like that. Like, that's not what I want. So interesting. Anyway, look, we're out of time. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Henry. Lots of love for all of you. Really appreciate you joining me for a chat. And we're all out there just doing our bits every day that we can in our shadows of influence. If you have listened to this chat and you would like to hear more from us, let us know, and we can do more. I've got another 10 or so woke blokes keen to participate in the chat. So there's material there if it's of interest, but if it's not, that's okay. And you can reach out to any of us or follow us on LinkedIn. So thank you, and have a good day wherever you are in the world.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Cheers, Mark.
That's great.
Cheers, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Good to see you.